This is the ClarkCast podcast on clarkcast.com.
All right, so I personally have been noticing a pattern on this radio show right here the past couple weeks. Well, I mean, in all fairness, I did take a couple weeks off at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, so I really don't know how much of a pattern there is, but just work with me here for a second. You know, really ever since Bernie Sanders was even more than just a blip on a radar, I seem to just be talking about the guy more and more. And I'm trying to understand, or I was trying to understand, because I have a pretty solid theory. Why do I keep talking about Bernie Sanders? Why? A couple different reasons. One, my generation, the Millennials, for some flippin' reason, is attracted to this guy. I mean, he's an old, crazy guy with hair that goes in 15 different directions. He's 82,000 years old. Oh, and he's a socialist. So why is my generation obsessed with him? We're going to talk about more of that, and quite frankly, in depth with a fellow millennial here on the show later on. But first, we are T-minus 4 days until the Armageddon that Al Gore predicted almost 10 years ago. So you better say some prayers, maybe see a priest to confess your sins, or maybe if you just want to confess them right here on the radio. I'll go ahead and hear that. The ClarkCast radio program begins right now.
This, Saving the Republic, is one broadcast at a time. The ClarkCast with Matt Clark.
In the parts of the United States that contain the modern cities of Cleveland, Detroit, New York, in the northern tier, this is the difference between a nice day and having a mile of ice over your head. Keep that in mind.
Keep that in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been underreported in the news. Almost 10 years ago, Al Gore predicted that we would be at a crossing point, where we will be at a point where we cannot return from all of the harm that you people, with your breathing, the CO2 that you put out in the atmosphere, which has caused temperatures, well, not to rise in the past 18 years, but I mean, just follow me here, to rise in the past 18 years. You drive your cars. You take airplanes. Dick Kupke, I heard you flew on a jet for over 4 hours. You have any idea what kind of CO2 footprint that you left? Wait, hold on. Let's go ahead and do this right here. There we go. By the way, this is a theme from Armageddon, Bruce Willis. So appropriate right now. Shame on every single person listening to this radio show. Now, in theory, I mean, you could actually say by listening to the radio, you are leaving a carbon footprint because the radio needs electricity, which also creates a bigger CO2. But don't turn off the radio because this is the information you need. Let me read this a little bit here, coming out of the Daily Caller. And let me go ahead and switch my tone a little bit more soft-spoken. Just so you understand. It's like the, what's the commercials with the polar bears on the ice? You have somebody talking very softly. A narrator, who you can tell in the tone of his voice he really doesn't care. But he talks softly because he's getting paid a lot. And you may know of the narrator because he was on a really awful soap opera not so long ago. But just by the tone of his voice, you can judge if this stuff's serious. Coming out of the Daily Caller. Gore predicted when his film An Inconvenient Truth was first released at the Sundance Film Festival that the Earth would be in a true planetary emergency within the next 10 years unless drastic action was taken to reduce greenhouse gases. CBS News reported at the time that Gore's film predicted the worst-case scenarios and would be an ice age in Europe, massive floods in China, India, and other areas of the world. Quote, what really attracted us to his presentation is the tone Al strikes, said an Inconvenient Truth director Davis something to CBS. It's not righteous. It doesn't have a political agenda. It lands right in the middle. And Al just lays out with this in An Inconvenient Truth. And I think that's why the audience is willing to receive it. Less than 4 days, ladies and gentlemen. Less than 4 days until the Earth is at a point where we cannot return. I see joining me on the line right now, State Senator Patrick Kolbeck, who I am sure has a carbon footprint bigger than most of us here. Senator, how dare you? Well, welcome, sir. How are you?
All right. Hey, I want to make sure to call into your show before the world ended.
That's true. That's true. Now, a little behind-the-scenes note here. I guilt-tripped the senator here to call into my radio show. Would that be an appropriate characterization of this situation here?
Yeah, so when I get up to the pearly gate, that's one less thing I have to worry about now.
Right, because I'm sure our maker will say, Mr. Kolbeck, how come you did not call the Clarkcast more often? By the way, I think I'm going to hell just for saying that.
Anytime I'm invited there, you know it, and I appreciate everything you do, and I always say how talented and gifted you are with not just the facts, but also a way of delivering it in a way that's entertaining. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you, sir. The check's in the mail.
No, it's true, man. The thing I want to bring out to your listeners, though, listening to the intro, and obviously I put it out on Facebook, too, last week. I said, warning, we only have a week to live, according to Al Gore. And so it's next week, I think, right? The 20th? Or
the 27th.
27th, all right.
27th, yeah. So whatever you need to do in order to get your mortal affairs in order there, not only you, Pat, but everybody else, the Al Gore Armageddon clock, and I think Rush Limbaugh had something on his website for over 10 years holding this guy accountable, is ticking. I mean,
you know what's not humorous about this, though, is that that's what they're using this as a basis for what they're teaching our kids in school. And in social studies standards and the new science standards, this Al Gore inconvenient truth garbage is at the center of all of it.
Yes, and any sort of opposition. I mean, you read the news, you read the papers, not metaphorically, nobody reads a newspaper anymore, but I mean, you see what's out there. You'll see story after article after post about my child was subjected to an inconvenient truth, which is fine, but nobody is allowed to have some sort of, well, here's the other side of it right here, because the second you go up to the teacher or an administrator, they say, well, this is fact. No, it's not. It's one guy's theory based on a lot of junk science.
Yeah, exactly, and now it's gotten to the point of pure indoctrination in our schools. And if your listeners go up to morninginmichigan.com, you'll see a little link on the right-hand side talking about the new Michigan education standards. And you'll see both in social studies and science standards that are being proposed. The science standards were adopted by State Board of Ed. I'm on a focus group to hopefully stem the tide in some of the social studies standards that are pushing this malarkey. But I think it's about time that we actually realize that they're trying to convince everybody that this is the way it is. And now now you're a little bit younger than I am, but when I was growing up, the big fear was global cooling. Then it's global warming, and now the artist formerly known as global warming is now called global climate change. Well, who can argue with the fact that the climate changes, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. We all agree. We all know that the climate changes. I mean, there was the ice age. In fact, I've had climate scientists on the show, and they said before, we're actually going through a mini warming age right now, similar to what the Romans went through a couple thousand years ago. That doesn't mean it's man-made. It's climate change. Yeah, it does exist. It's a natural part of the Earth's cycle. Let me ask you a quick question here, Pat. When you say social studies standards, or you want to implement some standards at a very high level, what does that mean? I mean, give some examples of that.
So an example of that would be, here's a real easy one. They'll talk about instruct your students in what it means to live in the American democracy. Or let's go through the progressive era and go through all the different glorious achievements of our presidents and during the progressive era. Or in case of religious studies, they talk about the rise of Islam and how it's impacted society as a whole and America specifically. So that's what you're dealing with the social studies standards. And when you're talking about global climate change, of course, the push is around you as a global citizen. What are some key initiatives or things that you can do to help prevent global climate change, besides becoming the sun or something like that?
Wow. That's some powerful indoctrination right there. Morninginmichigan.com, you said you laid out what you're working on in that area, right?
Exactly. So I put in 15 proposed revisions, got the signatures of 17 other legislators to say, guys, this is wrong, we need to take a look at it. And I'm not going to, if I were to hit the reset button on standards, they'd look completely different. I realize that I'm one of many different perspectives that tie into this. All I want is for it to be accurate and politically neutral. And
yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah, what a concept. So accuracy. First of all, point out to the kids that we're not a democracy; we're a constitutional republic. And why is that important? There is a reason why it's important.
Yep.
And make sure that kids are instructed in the actual Constitution, not what other people say is in that Constitution. So some pretty simple, basic things, hopefully.
Well, coming from a guy who's clearly in a car right now, which I think is building up CO2 and throwing that out in the atmosphere right there. Shame on you, hypocrite on the phone.
You don't know that I'm not operating on sail power right now.
That's true.
You're just hearing the road noise from my tires.
Okay, I concede. You're correct. Hey, Pat, we only have a couple minutes here. I want to talk about the state of the state and really specifically the governor saying government has failed you to the residents of Flint. Talk a little bit about what's going on with Flint and even some of the politics at play after this made national media here.
Well, it's safe to say I don't always see eye to eye with the governor on a lot of policies. And senior pension tax, Medicaid expansion, the road tax, but in regards, I got to give him kudos for how he took the issue with the Flint water system head on, and I thought he did so in a very responsible manner in the State of the State address, and he gave a very detailed breakout of the timeline of key events associated with the Flint water crisis, and been fairly transparent on all those key issues. And I got to take my hat off to him as far as how he's handled this. Right now, the focus, of course, needs to be on making sure that we're taking care of the people that are impacted by it. And I'm happy to say our cruise team has been very supportive, getting water out to homeless shelters and pregnancy centers throughout the area, because they're often overlooked by all the rest of the area. So, but the focus should be right now, as the governor is focused as well, on taking care of the folks that are impacted by this.
Fantastic. The whole situation is just bleeped up, and let's just... I really wish I can say more on an FCC-controlled radio station, but watching the political stuff, and really, if you see some of the big names like Michael Moore and others coming out, tying this to a racial component, and it's just... I would be one of the first people to say there's probably some criminal charges that need to come down, probably more on the local level, maybe some at the state, but to just instantly make this into a political issue, it's just despicable.
I agree.
All right, brother. Hey, I want to have you back some other time, perhaps in studio. We can dive into a lot more stuff and really have you talk about the things that mean a lot to you as well. So I appreciate that. And before you go, I'm actually going to give you a parting gift. And this is really dedicated to you. Al Gore, what a wonderful world. Thank you, Pat Kolvik. Appreciate it. Take care.
I see trees of green at the North Pole. What about Santa? Where will he go? And I think to myself, what a horrible world. I see seas of blue over Times Square, huge hurricanes, and nobody cares. And I think to myself, what a horrible world. The threat of global warming, so scary to recite. It's coming for your children, and time is flying by. I see friends wringing hands saying, what can we do? That's when I tell them, stop being you. 'Cause if we don't do something now, like tear down your homes, we'll suffer more than we've ever known. And I think to myself, what a horrible world. Yes, America, you've made it.
That's right, America.
Such a horrible world. Oh, yeah.
Such a lovely voice. By the way, I really wish I can give credit where credit is due, but I have no idea where that came from other than
Matt Clark, the Clarkcast.
the internet. I mean, we get everything off the internet. By the way, the little secret to radio is just get everything off the internet. All these clips I play, it's off the internet. Just talk around them. It's a little bit more involved than just that. More when we come back. 734-822-1600 is the phone number. 734-822-1600. After the bottom of the hour here, going to have a fellow millennial on the air here talking about Bernie Sanders, the sensation that is the burn with fellow millennials. Why are people my age? Why are they flocking to this old white hair goofy socialist who's from Brooklyn of all places? I mean, he can't even say America all right. 734-822-1600. 734-822-1600. Back in a few moments here.
Bringing a surge of energy to the airwaves. This is the Clarkcast with Matt Clark. This is the Clarkcast with Matt Clark. Call Matt now, 734-822-1600.
Just a reminder to everybody, you have less than 4 days to get your immortal affairs in order before the end of the world, according to Al Gore, from his infamous, now taught in our elementary schools film, An Inconvenient Truth. Less than 4 days. Less than 4 days. Thanks to Pat Kolbick for calling in. His website, www.morninginmichigan.com, www.morninginmichigan.com. I am actually privileged to have yet another caller call in, somebody I know quite well. And, you know, there was a time where I would introduce this guy playing his favorite song of all time. And Dave Janda, we are going to do just that. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, Matt. Thanks for having me aboard.
Now, you remember back in the day when you said Poker Face was just your favorite. Lady Gaga.
She still is my favorite.
Not man.
And proud of it, Matt.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what.
Although I am not as big a fan of Lady Gaga as Theron is of Barry Manilow.
Well, nobody is. I mean, that's just a level that's not attainable. I mean, let's be honest here with each other today.
I agree with you. Hey, so the reason why I'm calling in, you know, I'm a big fan of Pat Kolbeck's. I think he's one of the very few people in government that is looking out for the welfare of people. He was talking about our good friend, Rick Jennifer Schneider. As you know, I'm not a fan of his, and I've actually called for his removal from office from about a year after he was in office based on a pattern of what I felt at the time, and I think has only proven to be correct, of his arrogance, implementation of a globalist agenda, and his absolute lack of foresight in trying to protect the health and welfare of the citizens of this state. I think the latest example, obviously, is this issue with the lead in the water that was kept under wraps, obviously, for a period of time. And frankly, I think from that alone, I think this is I'm speaking as a clinician now. This is an enormous public health issue. This is not a media-generated event. This is an enormous public health issue when it comes to the
just take a look at the water from any of the news clips that you see. Right. It's brown.
Yeah, and you know, man, I don't know if you had an opportunity to watch Fox 2 News with Charlie Duff. He sat him down. He asked him some pretty tough questions. But, you know, one of the questions he looked at Schneider and said, would you have your kids bathe in this water? And I would have asked him, would you bathe in this water right now? Why expose his poor grandkids to potential health problems? And Schneider looked right at LaDuff and said, oh, yeah, fine.
Really? Fox 2?
This is arrogance. This is incompetence. This is, I believe, trying to institute his globalist agenda where us useless eaters really don't matter. And it's not just the lead issue right now, Matt. Something came out the other night in the wee hours of the morning, and it's not only lead that had contaminated this water in Flint. It's Legionnaire's disease. And the governor's office and the state sat on this information. They had determined when they had switched over from the water supply that Legionnaire's disease had infiltrated into the Flint water system. And in fact, in a period of time, 10 people died. 77 others became ill from Legionnaire's disease. And this just became public when they issued the reports this past week.
Dave, I got to fly here. I know you're going to talk more about this on your show Sundays at 3 o'clock, 3 to 5 p.m., davejanda.com. And I don't mean to cut you off. We're just at the bottom of the hour here. And as I said with Pat Kolbick, a lot of people are politicizing this. You're not. You're just saying, here are the facts. Here is why people are suffering. Charges do need to press. Where that is going to happen, we need to find out because people are dying and people are getting sick. More when we come back. Don't go anywhere. Keep it locked right here on the Clarkcast.
Stay tuned for more of the Clarkcast with Matt Clark. Bringing a surge of energy to the airwaves. This is the Clarkcast with Matt Clark.
Welcome back to the show that unveils the insanity of today's politics every Saturday at 1 o'clock right here at Wham Radio, WAAM here in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Also streaming through FTR Radio from the Right Radio. Thomas LeDuc and crew, shout out to you guys, even though you probably don't give me a shout out. But whatever, I'm not going to hold it over you or continuously say that on the air like I do. No, not at all. www.clarkcast.com is my website. Of course, you can follow me at Clarkcast on Twitter. And of course, like my face on Facebook, or like my page on Facebook. You can like my face too. Facebook.com/Clarkcast. I gave a little bit of a billboard in the beginning part of the program. I wanted to transition later on in the show and talk about Bernie Sanders a little bit. As a millennial, I am a little bit not shocked. I don't know. I'm looking for the right word. I'm looking at other millennials and saying, now, why are you so gung-ho with Bernie Sanders? Is it the promise of free stuff? And I'm thinking to myself, millennials aren't stupid. And then I just laugh and go, oh, yeah, we are. Uh-huh. Before I bring up my guests, I want to play something that Bernie Sanders said in the last Democratic debate, and I thought this was quite powerful. And he's really pushing a new form of health care. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, did not go far enough. No, because we need to get rid of, according to him and his ilk, private insurance companies altogether. And he was making this argument last Saturday.
I'm on the committee that wrote the Affordable Care Act. I made the Affordable Care Act, along with Jim Clyburn, a piece of legislation. I voted for it. But right now, what we have to deal with is the fact that 29 million people still have no health insurance. We are paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, getting ripped off. And here's the important point. We are spending far more per person on health care than the people of any other country. My proposal: provide health care to all people, get private insurance out of health insurance, lower the cost of health care for middle-class families by $5,000. That's the vision.
By $5,000. Now, to the low information voter out there, you would go, whoa, he's going to lower my healthcare costs by $5,000. Sign me up, man. This guy's my guy. Hey, how did this work out for you?
I also have a healthcare plan that would save the average family $2,500 on their premium.
Yeah. So the promise of bigger government to solve your healthcare woes in 2008 yielded an increase of healthcare costs. Now, I wonder if we just had a little bit more government, and by a little bit, I mean a whole hell of a lot more, to the Bernie Sanders Medicare for All plan, if that really is going to reduce it by $5,000 or whatever he proposes.
29 million people still have no health insurance. And here's the important point. We are spending far more per person on health care than the people of any other country.
We're spending more, but I thought Obamacare was going to take care of that. Well, we just didn't go far enough. The problem with socialism is nobody's done it right yet. But don't worry, as long as we get on the burn wagon, we're going to go ahead and implement everything that we need to do. Yeah. The challenge that I put forth to fellow millennials and anybody, not just the millennial generation, is please use your head a little bit. Just ask a few more questions instead of saying, oh, please, sir, I want some more government. I want more stuff, please. Just ask a couple questions. How are we going to pay for that? I mean, that's just some of the bigger, higher-end stuff. Joining me on the phone right now is Bree Payton. She's the Federalist Millennial Politics and Culture writer. And Bree, it's a pleasure to have a fellow millennial on the air. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Now, I've been monitoring some of the stuff that you've been doing ever since your publicist said, hey, we have a fellow millennial here. And by the way, I love The Federalist. www.thefederalist.com had a couple contributors on the show already, so you guys do some fantastic work. So keep it up. But the question that I have, and even reading some of your work you have, I can make an answer. I can give an answer to it, but I'm struggling to figure out why my generation, which is also your generation, is flocking to this guy.
Yeah, so I think it's really because he prioritizes things that are important to us, right? So the things that are really troubling us right now, at least, with me and most of, people that I know that are my age, is student loans, for one thing, is a really big issue, right? Like, we all are graduating with huge amounts of debt. I think the average amount of debt is like $28,000 per graduate. And some of us are like so freaked out about this that we're fleeing the country. Okay, like there's people actually just boarding planes and leaving so that way they don't have to fulfill their obligations.
Literally crossing the border and leaving the United States?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure that was metaphorical or literal. Okay.
No, literally. People are literally doing that. So anyway, but I think that goes to show just kind of how big of a problem this is for us. Okay. So a lot of candidates, their proposals are just not very, they're not very satisfying. Like Hillary Clinton, her proposal to make education cheaper is kind of, I don't know, it's really just kind of maintaining the status quo, right? And that's what we're seeing from a lot of candidates is they don't even talk about, student loan burdens, or when they do, it's just like, oh, well, we don't really have to do that much about it. Okay. So Bernie Sanders has really made this a big part of his platform, okay, to make higher education free for everyone. So I definitely see how that one thing would already just sell a lot of us right there.
Sure.
Okay. And also, to your point earlier, how you were talking about why don't millennials understand that, more government doesn't work? Why don't they understand that?
Well, we're stupid, first of all. I mean, that's not to insult you. Not to insult you. They're stupid, first of all. I mean, that's kind of that's what I've been throwing against the wall, and it seems to be sticking here when I start to put the pattern together of, wait a minute, how come all the millennials are going to X, Y, and Z issue here in the way that they are?
Right. But I mean, can you blame them for being stupid? Think about where all of us spent our time the past 20 years of our lives, right? We spent it in classrooms that taught us that more government was good. So it's not really a big surprise that that's what we're deciding to pick now. And also, we kind of living through the 2008 recession where we watched our parents vote for politicians who the way that they dealt with a big financial crisis was just to throw more money at the problem, right? Via stimulus and bailouts. And it seemed to kind of work, right? Everything is okay now. I mean, we're all still here. So, okay, maybe this is the way that things go. So in the millennial mind, I could definitely see past experiences like that kind of shaping how they perceive government.
Well, let me ask you a little bit on that. I mean, I agree with everything that you've wrote, so I'm not here to debate you or challenge you or anything like that. I'm 28. Whether it's just a different upbringing or a proper education or what, when I look at all the money, the stimulus, and even TARP, even though TARP's been paid back and all this, but still government was the problem. When I look at all of the money that was tossed from the taxpayers to X, Y, and Z problem, I don't see a solution that's coming. I mean, just look at the stock market, the way it's crashing right now. Look at where we are from the student debt. I mean, that's a consequence of, oh, no, just keep throwing money. It's another bubble that's about to burst. I could also add on top of that, just look at the underemployment. I know they try to gloss over, it's 5-point-something% now. No, well, what is the underemployment rate as well? And the list goes on, the decrease of salaries and really how people are not making money. So is it just they don't know what a good time is? They don't know what a good economy looks like or what?
Yeah, I would say part of it is that they don't know what a good economy looks like, right? I'm 23. When Obama was inaugurated, I was in high school. When when George Bush was inaugurated, I was 7 years old. So I don't really know anything different from right now, right? So I could see definitely a lot of millennials just thinking, okay, when you have a problem, you just throw more money at it. I think that's really what they think. And also, in that clip that you played a little bit earlier about, the exchange between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton over Medicaid, I think that's another really good example of the difference between those two candidates, right? You have Hillary Clinton, who is really basically, she told us that she's just going to fight for Obamacare and make sure that Obamacare is there, okay? But Obamacare is really terrible for millennials. Like it's increased like the premiums that we have to pay by 5.5%, I think, just among young people, because young people are footing the bill for this whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this really terrible piece of legislation that's really just failing. And it's more expensive for us. Like, why would we want to vote for a candidate who is just going to fight for the same thing that's been really terrible for us the past couple of years? So I could see if you're interested in a single payer health system, which I'm not, but if that was what you wanted, right? Like you wanted everyone to get free health insurance from the government, I could see that Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan would be much more appealing than Hillary Clinton's pledge to just keep Obamacare.
And if you're also, let me just play that 10-second clip again, because I want to make a counterpoint to this.
29 million people still have no health insurance. And here's the important point. We are spending far more per person on health care than the people of any other country.
We're spending far more per person on healthcare than any other person in the country. And his point is that's because private insurance. Just keep saying that phrase over and over and over again. So if we're spending more than anybody else and we have private insurance, but we look at insert some other European democratic socialist country, they have healthcare for all and their low rates. To a millennial, I can see how, well, wait a minute, hold on, I want to be like them because they have lower healthcare.
Right. Well, the important distinction is the healthcare that you get in other countries is very different than the healthcare that you get here.
Very much so, yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. So, I mean, you know, in England or Canada or whatever, if you break your arm, okay, fine, you can go and get that fixed. You know, you'll be fine. But if you have a more difficult condition, right, like something that you are living with day in and day out, you may, if you were to move to England or some other country, you may or may not get the same kind of care that you would get here.
And not to mention the rationing of care. The older that you are more of a burden on society. Why am I going to dump $20,000 or whatever amount of pounds that is in the UK, just as an example here, if you only have 5-10 more years to live? I mean, that rationing does happen. And same thing with Canada. I like to listen to the other side. And in my car, I like to toggle over to the Sirius progressive station just to see what they're saying. And actually, of all places, and I cannot believe I found this little nugget of knowledge or this little counterpoint to that, physicians, doctors, nurses, and everybody in the healthcare industry get paid significantly. I mean, a fraction of what they get paid over here. So although most doctors go into medicine for the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, to actually save lives, they also do want a decent salary given the amount of education that they have to endure and go through, but also at the same time, compensation. They don't have that overseas. I mean, it's I don't know a dollar amount, but it's, for all intents and purposes, minimum wage over there compared to this.
Right, exactly. And also under Obamacare, doctors really don't want to take the kind of coverage that people have with it.
No,
right? Like
doctors now don't want Medicare or
Medicaid.
Yeah, doctors now do not want Medicaid. They don't.
Right. So what's happening is that emergency room wait times are just going through the roof because that's the only way that people with Obamacare can get seen a lot of times.
Yeah.
A lot of the doctors in their area, they're not going to see you if that's the only thing that you have. So you're forced to go to an emergency room and wait for hours and hours and hours to get seen for anything. So I definitely could see, from our perspective, right, we're looking at this and we're saying, okay, this is why the government needs to get out of the healthcare system, right? But from a perspective of, you know, growing up and seeing every single problem just, oh, okay, you just throw more money at it and put more government in place and that seems to fix it. I could see why they would think, oh, we just don't have enough government in here right now. We need a Medicare for all.
Yeah. When we had, so in the state of Michigan here, like a lot of different states, a couple of years ago, we were battling the idea of Medicaid expansion as part of Obamacare. And not go too deep in the historical weeds here, but one of the good parts of the Supreme Court ruling on Obamacare, the first part around, was the federal government cannot force states to implement Medicaid. So here in the state of Michigan, our Republican governor was all for that extra handout that he had. And one of the arguments I was making, I was on the air at the time saying, statistically speaking, I was citing statistics and studies, a patient with Medicaid receives poorer quality of care than a patient without insurance at all. That's how much doctors, hospitals, so on and so forth hate Medicaid because it does not reimburse a fraction of what they should be. So, I mean, it's just something to think about, and it's often left out of this discussion because, to your point, to what I've been saying earlier, it's really nice and sexy to say healthcare for all without reading the fine print.
Yeah, exactly.
I want
and well, doctor.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like you said, doctors, they just aren't paid the same when they're getting paid from the government versus when they're getting paid from the private sector.
Yep. And I'm all for healthcare reform. I mean, it probably goes without saying. I think there are good free market solutions we can explore to drastically lower the cost of care while increasing the quality of care. I want to take you through an audio series here. You may have seen this. This hit the national media a couple months ago. The Million Student March, there was a young lady who appeared on Fox Business with Neil Cavuto demanding that we want $15 minimum wage, that we want our tuition to be debt wiped clean, free tuition for all, so on and so forth. And there's a couple different audio series that I want to play, but I want to frame it in the thought process of a millennial. They're able to somewhat articulate an argument, but any time somebody says, well, hold on, how do you counter this logical fact? Their argument falls apart. And I want to get your reaction to this. Here's the first one here.
The Million Student March is a movement for a more equitable and fair system of education as opposed to the really corporate model that we have right now. So the three core demands of the National Day of Action are free public college, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for people who work on the campus.
Okay, that's pretty consistent or very similar to what Bernie Sanders is pushing. And this girl right here, this young lady, is a millennial. Now, the first question Neil asks is...
And how's that going to be paid?
Great question. I mean, so I'm not sure if you're talking on like a national level or at particular schools. I can sort of touch on both. At my university, Northeastern University,
someone asked to pick up the tab. Who would that be?
The 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe that students are facing.
Oh, those bastards. All right, one more, and this is really the sticking point that I think most millennials need to understand.
Even if you were to take the 1% and take all of their money, tax it 100%, do you know that couldn't keep Medicare, just Medicare in this country going for 3 years? Did you know that?
If we're to a point where the rich is paying 100% on their taxes, then we're on the road to socialism and we're going to have a completely different type of public infrastructure.
No, what I told you is that even if you took all the money from the rich who you say are getting away with murder, and you took it all away, it wouldn't support one entitlement in this country for 3 years.
I don't believe that.
Bree, 2 points here. First of all, if we're taxing everybody at 100%, we're already on the road to socialism, was one of her points. And the second one was, no, that's not right. No, these millionaires and 1%ers have all the money in the world. And by the way, to be a 1%er, you only need to make in the six-figure range, I think 300 something, which is a lot of money, but it's not a millionaire or a billionaire.
Yeah, I definitely think that economic concepts tend to kind of escape millennials. But I don't think we should fault them for that. Right? Like, I think a lot of the stuff that they believe has been kind of what has been taught to them.
Yes.
Or, they just sort of parrot it back.
Yes.
And I think, like, the fact that she, didn't know a lot of this stuff kind of just shows, like, what a poor state civic education is.
Stupid is what I was saying. I mean, this is where you and I might start differing. I completely agree that it was in the classroom and to even outside the classroom with a lot of what was going on. You mentioned in the 2008 crisis, the solution was your parents voted for Obama, hope and change, just throw money at it. Yeah. I get that their foundation was shoddy to begin with, but at a certain point, you got to think for yourself. And at a certain point, what you learned in school, maybe it just defines you so much that there is no breaking through and just asking some logical questions like, hey, if we took everybody's money, it still won't work. If that's the case, game over. We're done.
Right. Well, and I think also we have to, if you think about where millennials are right now, a lot of them do rely on funding from their parents. I think it's like half, of adult millennials rely on their parents for help. And a lot of them went through school relying on loans, right? So I think the concept of paying for your own stuff may not necessarily be something that they're familiar with. And I say this as someone who has student debt. And I say this as someone, like, I'm still under my parents' health insurance. Okay, so I'm not saying, like, oh, look at all these terrible millennials that don't know how to support themselves. I'm saying, like, the kind of system that we grew up in, I would say probably, like it kind of forced our hand, I think,
Sure.
for some of us.
Yeah, and I don't fault
Right,
those
so
under
higher
26
education,
for
like,
staying
it's
on
so
their
much
insurance.
more expensive now. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I don't fault anybody for staying on their insurance policy for 20. I don't agree with the policy, but I don't fault any sort of millennial young adult for staying on their parents' insurance. I mean, that's the law. Take advantage of it. Work the system the best that I don't fault them for that.
Well, I think there's kind of my point is that I think there's an interesting dichotomy in the millennial mind, right? So I think a lot of millennials are like hiding from these really terrible, failed progressive policies with their parents, is what I'm saying. So I'm seeking shelter from like the healthcare market right now by staying under my parents' health insurance until I'm 26 years old. Like I'm seeking shelter from that environment right now. But at the same time, so like I guess it's interesting to watch like millennials stay on their parents' health insurance. I think only like 25% of them, opt to get insurance through their employer. Okay, so a lot of them are staying under their parents' health insurance, and a lot of them are getting student debt because the cost of education has skyrocketed in large part to federal subsidies. And so they're getting loans, and a lot of them are relying on their parents just for everyday expenses. So they're kind of living in this interesting bubble where they're hiding from a lot of these progressive policies that got us there in the first place, but at the same time they want more of it.
Sure.
Because they think that that'll get them out. Like it's just an interesting, like they're between a rock and a hard place, I think.
Sure.
And I think that's why they're not maybe thinking so clearly.
So what's the solution then? Not voting for Bernie Sanders. I think we can agree with that part.
Yeah. Well, and also I think the solution is just having honest conversations about it. Like I think a lot of the discussions that we do have about issues like minimum wage and higher education, they don't have the full story. And, a lot of this just really drives me nuts because if you look at the minimum wage statistics, like 90% of people who are actually earning minimum wage are all under the age of 25. Yep. And I think after like 5 years, like 75% of them like are out of earning minimum wage, if that makes sense. So
no, very much so,
if you just look at the numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you can see that, there aren't families, this myth of like the family living off of minimum wage, like it's just not true.
Yeah.
So 90% of the people who are earning minimum wage, they're super young and they're only doing it for a couple of years.
Sure.
So I think if we have an honest conversation, people wouldn't be so eager to rush into raising the minimum wage, right? Because who cares if like a 15-year-old makes minimum wage for like 2 years? That's fine. He can do that because he still is relying on help from his parents.
Yep.
And I think like 80% of them, like they're not the sole, like their own personal expenses are subsidized by others in their family, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm trying not to be the glasses half empty guy in this conversation, but I go back to that Neil Cavuto audio with the Million Student March, young adult. That was an honest conversation, but everything was dismissed. Oh, there's no way that if you take all the 1% money, that it's only good for Medicare or Medicaid. I forget which statistic that he rambled off. There's no, that's not right.
Well, I think... Do you really think that she went home and didn't rethink her position?
No, I don't think she did.
With Neil, I think it definitely made her think, right? So I think if we keep having honest conversations like the one between that student and Neil Cavuto and the one that we're having right now, I think it would definitely push us in the right direction because I honestly don't think a lot of them have heard any of these things before. Like I think they're really being kept in the dark. I
would agree with that. I don't think she went home and went, yeah, I would have to concede that. I think she went home and went to her Million Student March folks and said, that's the war on women right there. That's what that was. That wasn't a factual back and forth. He's a sexist. Maybe I've just been in radio too long and I've been in politics too long that I'm just jaded, but I'm hoping you are right, Bree. I'm hoping I am wrong.
Well, I hope so too.
Thanks. Bree Payton, the Federalist millennial politics and pop culture writer. Check out her work at www.thefederalist.com, thefederalist.com. Thanks for coming on. This was a great conversation, and you have an open invite anytime you want to come on this show.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good one. See, I think this chick went home and went, oh my gosh. Oh, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. He makes millions of dollars, Neil Cavuto. Oh my gosh, he just doesn't want his money to be siphoned off. By the way, if you have a moment, if you have a chance, look up that entire interview on YouTube. There's more than 2 minutes, and I'm looking at the times here, more than 2 minutes worth of good, cringe-worthy audio that I did not play that is worthwhile to play. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Clarkcast radio program. As always, check out my website, www.clarkcast.com, for show highlights and more. Less than 4 days to the world ends, according to Al Gore. Get your affairs in order.
The Clarkcast with Matt Clark. For show highlights and more, visit www